Alright, third time's the charm. Okay, so here we are at Redwall, Badgers and Bells, a Redwall podcast, going through 22 books. 22 long books that have basically the same kind of story. These are good versus evil. Um, they're done fun. Um, the question is to what degree? That's the question we're here to ask. To what degree are these successful? Because sometimes the good versus evil can be a little basic, the characters can be a bit repetitive, there's kind of stereotypes and archetypes a lot of times going on, and so we're here to explore what's the best of the best, basically. I think that's the best way after thinking about it and trying to do this a couple times. That's really what we're here to decide. What is the best of the best? What works? What doesn't? Are the later books really worse than the older books? Um, because I think there's a dip in quality, but that may have just been tiredness. So we're gonna find that out. Um, yeah. So here we are. Brian Jacques' Redwall. Brian Jacques was a British author, grew up in Liverpool, was a merchant sailor, did a lot of stuff, and eventually did some work for a blind school. And he decided to tell them a bunch of stories. One of those stories was Redwall. He eventually wrote Redwall down, gave it to a friend. The friend gave it to a publisher without his knowing, and we got Redwall. We at least got the first 5 books in the series, and they were successful enough. The series continued until his death about 15 years ago. Um, yeah, about 15 years ago. And that was kind of heartbreak in my life. It's one of in terms of, I'm not a celebrity guy at all, but there's 2 or 3 that kind of did hit me. And Brian Jacques was one of them from reading books growing up. Um, there's one other. Well, I'm gonna bring up sometime when I do my animal stuff. Uh, by the way, quickly, no new episode tomorrow. I'm gonna be doing a book signing. It'll be Father's Day, so no drawing animal podcast tomorrow. So if you're watching this and wondering that, that's where that is. There will be a drawing video though, sort of like the thing I did for Mother's, my mom's birthday. There will be something for Father's Day. So hopefully you will enjoy that. And as you saw, I'm gonna start doing some maybe animation stuff with my Drawing Animal podcast and some of that stuff. So that's another reason why I wanted to hold off, because doing that would be a shift, especially if I decided to include it in my main series as well. I started doing it for um, Ungulate Wednesday, and I thought that would be pretty easy because it's way shorter and stuff. But we'll see. So that's the other reason I want to see. Do I want to integrate that into the broader um, drawings as a whole? And I did it for one of the characters. So if you noticed, Slagar, the cruel, or as I titled it, Luna Stellaris, Master of Life and Death. He's one of the main villains in the series, and we'll get to him. And he's one of the best villains in the series. So yeah, the basic premise is that there's a Redwall Abbey in which good creatures live versus bad creatures. That's the basic premise. And there's usually some basic stuff. Of course, there's an abbot and abbess. There's some reoccurring ideas and characters, like an infirmary keeper, cellar keeper, usually a hedgehog. And the animals are usually the same, so you usually get hedgehogs, otters, mice, squirrels as the good guys, and stoats, foxes, rats, ferrets as the bad guys. You get some more stuff. And the bell stuff comes from the fact that there's a major bell tower in Redwall Abbey that becomes a main feature. It gets split at one point. So it starts off as the Joseph Bell. I think it's just called the Joseph Bell, and then it gets split into Matthias and Methuselah Bells. So that's why it's called Bells. And then the other aspect is that there's a fiery mountain on which dwells the other major good section, which is the Badger Lords with their army of hares known as the Long Patrol. Again, all both of these elements are will be in one of the books. On sometimes they include both books, but yeah, there you go. And this is just a strange series to go through because, again, I love this series as a kid, but it has a lot of reoccurring elements, and the question is, does that get tiring? Especially when you're dealing with kind of basic good versus evil stuff. And sometimes the basic good and evil stuff it's fine, it's good. I'm not against this kind of storytelling at all. It's just sometimes it doesn't get explored the way I think the series ought to have at times. And then when it does, there's a really weird one, and I'm not sure if I totally agree with Brian Jacques' conclusion on this issue. I'm not sure if that's very helpful. We'll get to it. Outcast is very explores this good and evil stuff probably the most of the series, and I'm not sure the conclusion that it maybe reaches. I don't know if it's trying to reach a conclusion or if it's just a statement from the characters. So we'll get into all that. Very strange. Especially when, again, you have such a contrast between good and evil in terms of just not the basics of it, but even just in character. So, we'll see. So yeah. So, and again, a lot of these characters are repetitive. So, common thing is you're going to have with otters, a skipper of otters, and he's throughout most of the books. And we're going to see, is the skipper of otters just there? Or is there anything ever done unique with skipper of otters? Same with hares. Hares kind of fall into some basic traps. Being perilous but also gluttonous, and whether or not that always works. And I was listening to one of the books on Audible, and we'll get into that, the Audible stuff, audiobooks of these. Excellent. Excellent audiobooks. They're probably one of my favorite audiobooks to listen to. But I was going through one of the books, Tris, which is somewhere in here now. I'll probably not be able to find it since I reorganized. Boy, but Tris, I was going through and I found it not as exciting or as fun as I remember, and there was some real pacing, weird stuff. One of the characters ended up being kind of like, wow, in terms of the annoyance factor, and like I think book mostly knows the book mostly knows this, but it I kind of wish you could punish the character more, sort of. Um, yeah, so it's a weird thing. So that's Triss was kind of the reading Triss again and finding it not as good as some of the other books in the series. It's kind of what started this off, actually, strangely. But I also want to talk about it because no one talks about this in detail. I mean, there's some basic overviews, but and I saw there were a couple of videos. One is called The Enduring History of Redwall, which I would say go watch. I didn't watch in preparation only because of of kind of my affiliation with the series is very strong, and I also didn't want anyone else influencing the way I look at this. But if you want probably a great introduction, I would suggest also that series. Probably has a bit more production quality than mine. Uh, but um, yeah, so this will be a series to get through, especially if I decide to go into more detail. So there's 22 books. There's also a graphic novel of Redwall, which I want to look at. I brought up the Redwall cookbook a couple weeks ago when I was working on stuff, and I just threw a quick video on that. But I like that, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some thoughts I have on the series in general. I might just do, instead of doing a read through of the book at one point. But I also want to talk about what I do like. And there's some touching stuff. There's some really amazing, like some of the best deaths ever in fiction are in this series. I'm sorry, they just are. Like outside of like Tolkien and Lewis, Brian Jacques does death really well. Um, Tragedy and also like they kill the villain, but also like kind of horror, especially with like what the villains do at times. There's some really great stuff with that. With the cookbook, the food is great. Food description is always great in Redwall. So explore that. Um, so yeah, and then there's things like Abbey Babes, which are called Dibbins in the series, which are occasionally fun, but they also can get old really fast, and so yeah, it kind of drags down, especially when you're like, give me more warriors, please. I don't want to spend all my time with baby, baby moles. Um, but yeah, so it has its ups and its downs and everything in between. So here we go. Um, it'll be a long journey. I will also be exploring some similar series. There's something called Miss Mantle, which I read the first book of, and I remember not liking it when I first read it, but I'm actually curious to go back to it. It was just so weird. It was so weird in comparison to Redwall that I was like, huh, strange, very strange. The common series that I want to get into that's like this to see what he does, if he's how good he um, is the Ember Chronicles. I've got a couple books on download, thankfully by the author for free. The first book especially, so I'm excited to listen to that and see what I think. So I'm excited to share my thoughts on that series and how it compares to Redwall. Um, and then let's see. There's a book called Journey to Freedom, written by Gilbert Morris, which is mice, rats, basic plot, good versus evil, but also really some really fun, unique stuff that differentiates it from Redwall. That I also want to look at. So we'll be looking at that. We'll be doing. I think I already mentioned everything else I'm doing. Uh, so yeah, and I'll be doing drawings. As you saw with Silager the Cruel, we'll probably do. I'll try to sneak in another drawing. Uh, I'm, I'm, I'm trying to do everything I can on this channel. So we'll see how I can keep up with everything. But I also want to increase my quality on this podcast series, on all my podcasts. So we'll see how it goes. Is that all I want to talk about? Because I wanted to re-summarize this. I went on way too long on the previous one. um, I guess the important um, other main staple to be aware of is that there's a character called Martin the Warrior, who is the founder of Redwall, who's kind of the warrior founder, at least with some other characters, but he's the warrior founder. And he at least has 3 books he appears in, making him the second most. There's only him and one other character that appears most in the series. And Martin has the most appearances because he comes in dreams and visions and a lot. And because he's the warrior, he handed down a sword, which becomes the main sword of the series. Anytime you usually have a main hero, you will see the sword appear in that warrior's hand. Um, and we'll get into the whole nature of that. And then, and then on the other side, Salmon Dastron, what I do want to touch on is that badgers are going to be uh, important, I think, examination of this series because how often they occur, why they occur, the nature of what is known as the blood wrath, which is kind of the violent the once they get into a warrior state and seek to destroy uh, some evil creature, they don't let go of it very easily. So badgers kind of become a big important symbol for the series. Depending and but it also depends how often they occur and the issues with that. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes, and especially in the later series, it feels very kind of just. At points, it feels phoned in. Not always, but at points it does. And sometimes it feels like we have a badger for no reason. Um, at a couple points. Not all the time, but at a couple points. And so the badger is kind of a big, the badger and also who the hero is in these series will be a big determination, and also quality of the villain. Um, those will be some big things. And then I think the other big thing is actually alongside the badgers, the hares, because there will be a hare thing about them being perilous but also gluttonous, which occurs a lot in the series, and how that's handled is very, very waffly. I was reading Triss, and this was one of the elements where I was like, "Oh my gosh, you, Brian Jacques, have taken the hair way too far. This element has gone way too far. It's starting to sound like parody." And in some of the later books, it does too. And it's like, man, is this it? Can we please stop with the gluttonous hair thing? The gluttonous hair thing is starting to get annoying, especially when it makes it sound like it's unique sometimes, and it isn't. Oh my gosh. We'll get into it. We'll get into it. But there's various of hairs. Like some of the hairs are also some of the best in the series, and there's a later hair which is so unique, so different than anything he had done before, that it's a wonder. It's like him versus the one in Triss is like night and day. It's a night and day difference. Um, I might as well at least say his name. Captain Frank W. Bloodpaw versus a character named Bascarum. I, I think you can tell which one is the just by the naming. But we'll get into it. So that's what I want to talk about. Just Redwall and how does it rank as a series as a whole? What elements work? When do they work? And it's the quintessential series on when when are stereotypes or archetypes fine, and when do they not work anymore, and why don't they work anymore? Is it simply just out of tiredness, or is there something just fundamentally missing? We'll get into it. All right, but I love it. I love this series. I do love this series. It feels daunting, but also I love it. There's some elements that are just so good. Man, I remember some great stuff, but also relooking there's some strange stuff again. So there you are, Badgers and Bells, a Redwall podcast, and I don't know what I got myself into. I was talking about this in my longer video, but I don't know what I got myself into. Uh, we'll get into it, and I may do a separate video on an overview of each book. Maybe next time, or I'll do it again tonight. We'll see. All right, there we are. There's Redwall. Okay, here we go. Wild ride. Bye.